28. Now, continuing what we were speaking about earlier in the Maimon, about the difference between the Dalit Kaisis and the Gimel Matzahs, because we were getting into the idea of Simcha, to do with Yayin, and there's the wine of has to do, that's Pascha Shirim has to do with Pesach and the Seder. The wine that it speaks about over there is the level of Simcha and the level of Mishta, connected with the level of Bina. He says that Bina, we spoke about yesterday, the end of the previous paragraph, in the previous paragraph, we spoke about how Bina has a higher shortish than the level of Chachma. Because of that, it comes down to many details, and the same thing Simcha has the quality and advantage over Tainug, over the light, because Simcha is also the level of Ispashtus, of expansion, etc. And when we have the level of expansion, so then it comes down to many details, and that source is from a very high source above, a much higher source than without the level of Bin, without the level of Simcha. Now the Alter Rebbe continues, because we brought in also that the wine, as opposed to the matzah, the wine is Medivrei Sefer. And it's much more special, the fact that it's Medivrei Seferim, that it comes from a higher level than the words of the Torah. The Torah Shebeksav is like Chachma, Torah Shebal is Bina, including the words of the Seferim. And we see that the words of the Seferim come into a lot of Ischalkus, because you get into Mishnayos, and there's even more Ischalkus in the Brises, and even more Alamas Adei Mispar. You have, without a number, you have concerning the memras of the Amaroi. So now he goes on line 28 in the bottom of Tez. That's the reason for what's explained in the Torah and Parsh Pekude. The great advantage and quality of the words of the Chachamim over the words of Torah. It says, top of the next page, that's like the advantage of the negative commandments, the don'ts, over the positive commandments, the things that we have to do. In this itself, in the mitzvahs medivrei seifrim, in the mitzvahs of the chachamim, yes, gam hamayla, the mitzvahs asi, there is also the advantage of positive commandments. A lot of Chanukah Mamarim speak about this, how mitzvahs Chanukah is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, and it contains in it both advantages, both the quality and the specialness of mitzvahs loisa and the specialness of mitzvahs asi, as the Maimon will go on to explain. First of all, what is the different levels and the qualities and advantages of mitzvahs asi and mitzvahs loisa. Top page Yud, line 2. The idea behind this is the Hine b'divrei Torah yesh chiluk bein mitzvahs asi mitzvahs loisa. In the words of the Torah, in other words, those things that are obligations, minat Torah, midaraisa. So there is a difference between positive and the negative commandments. Mitzvahs aseh, shem bekum v'aseh. Mitzvahs aseh is about getting up and doing something. Therefore, mamshichim b'chinas ha'oros ha'meslapshim b'kelim. We draw down those type of revelations and lights that can be enclosed in the vessel. They can become revealed internally, and mamish in a way of comprehension and grasp, meaning it's something that is grasped within the vessels, it's something that is revealed in the vessels, in the physical film that we put on. That item, that box of film becomes sanctified, becomes holy, and we are also has that kedusha that's nimshach in us in a pneumistic type of way. As opposed to through negative commandments, we draw down much higher levels of divine revelation that's not comparable to the vessels. They cannot become revealed internally in a way that's comprehended, in a way that we have a direct comprehension. Means when you know the thing itself. Not that you know about the thing by negating everything else, but you actually know the thing itself. It's called hasagas achiyuv. Rather, there are ways how we comprehend things, the ways that we take things that are in the way of a negative type of grasp, meaning that we derive and we figure out what it is by saying what it's not. Like, for example, you don't know what spirituality is, but you know what it's not. Spirituality is not something you could look, you could see. Spirituality is not something tangible that you could touch, etc., etc. You can't fit it into a physical limitation and so on. So you know it by way of asagas hashlila. The same thing, the level of the godly revelations that are brought down through the level of loises is also something that's called a way of asagas hashlila, a way of a negative type of grasping. Therefore, therefore, the way we fulfill it is a way of sit and don't do. In other words, remain, you cannot actively grasp it. The way how we connect with it is by being inactive, by being passive. But that in a way of negative. For example, all the non-kosher fats and all blood you should not eat. And similar to that, that's all about negative, not doing. On the other hand, so that is the difference and the advantage that each one has over the other. Mitzvahs Aseh versus Mitzvahs Loisa. Each one has something else. Mitzvahs Loisa is a higher light, but it doesn't permeate us. Mitzvahs Aseh is a lower light, but it permeates us. So each one has an advantage that the other one doesn't have. So the Rebbe is going to go on to explain, bringing from Kudet Toidam, that the Mitzvahs that Rabbanon has in it a combination of both advantages and both qualities. It says, when it comes to the words of the Chachamim, we have both advantages together. Close in the general idea of the words of the Chachamim, in general, it falls into the level of things that are fences and protections around the mitzvahs. So therefore, things that are fences and protections that are around the mitzvah. It's similar to the negative commandment. It's not something that is about the accomplishing. It's about prevention more. Kol makim still in all hareim bekum vasei, but the mitzvahs of the hachamim that are also in a way of rise up and do. So in excuse me, Shav Mitzvah Rabbanon. We're talking about the 7 mitzvahs with Rabbanon, that by them, it's something that you have to get up and do. Like, for example, Netilas Yadayim, you got to wash your hands. It's an action, it's an activity. But it's part of what's the Gedarim V'Siyagim. Or, for example, the light of Hanukkah, it's in a way of rising up and doing. That's the advantage of the words of the Chachamim, which is the oral Torah, al divrei Torah, Torah shebeksav, over the words of the Torah, which is the written Torah, meaning that we have a combination of both of these qualities. Also the higher lights that are beyond coming into vessels. They kind of come down internalized, and the way that we grasp it only in a negative type of comprehension. They recite them through the words of the Chachamim. They also are drawn down and become grasped in vessels because we are actually doing something like washing our hands, etc. That becomes a vessel for it. The reason for it is, why can the Divrei Seifrim combine these two opposites, which in the Divrei Torah and the Mitzvahs Min HaTorah, we find that each one is limited to its own thing. Mitzvahs Aseh has its own quality, and Mitzvahs Loisa has its own quality. It says, the level of the words of Seifrim is in the word of Bina, like we spoke about before, that Tersh Balpeh, that comes in the level of Bina, that's Musar Avicha. I think we had it here, or maybe later in the Maimon is going to use it. I forgot where it uses the term Musar Avicha here in the Teres Mecha. Mother is the level of Bina, just like we say, Ema Baran Smecha, she's the mother of Midas. Torah Shebeksav is considered Toiras Musar Avicha, that's a teaching of your father, that's the level of Chachma, the level of Abba. So, Dafke, because the words of the Chachamim are from the level of Bina, Yana Yisrakvas Vespalpas Lili Biprati, that Bina is about broadness and the vision to many details. Shaydei like Merkava asked me, through that we grasp the essential broadness in such a way that it's grasped in the vessel. Let's learn another paragraph before we open it up to questions. This advantage of and this quality of the words of Chachamim over the words of the Torah. The mile of Divrei Seifrim over Divrei Torah is in a similar vein the advantage and the quality of the inner part of the Torah over Nigla the Torah. The Pnimis HaTorah is also has to do with the wine of the Torah. It's something that's concealed. It's something that comes out, just like Bina is something that comes out from the concealment of Chachma. So to the inner part of the Torah is something that's concealed, that comes out and is revealed. It also says, Nichnas Yain Yotza Soid. When wine enters, the secret comes out. Secret is going in the inner part of the Torah. The Rebbe goes on to say, line 2 on page Yud Aleph, it's known, the saying of the Rebbe Rashab, when one is sitting in one's room, when learns the L'chutei Torah, and one opens or studies the L'chutei Torah, feel, one feels or they grasp the essence of the Eibishter. It's not understood. How is it possible to have a tfisa, to have a grasp in the level of Hashem's very essence as totally beyond the entire paradigm of comprehension and grasp? The idea behind this is, he says, similar to what was explained previously about the advantage of the words of the Chachamim, even those in matters that on their own cannot come, only in the way of negative. In other words, the only way how it's possible is when we have a negative doing, like mitzvah loisasa, it's done. If the mitzvah is fulfilled in a way of not doing an action, still in all them shachim, they come down through the words of the Chachamim in such a way that it could be grasped in the vessels. In a similar vein, this is the unique matter of the inner part of the Torah, the wine of the Torah. Through the inner part of the Torah, one could take Hashem's very essence, that usually Hashem's very essence, we say, defies the idea of coming down to vessels. And Pnimis HaTorah is like the words of the Chachamim that could bring that which is beyond vessels into vessels. Say them as even more so. Pnimis HaTorah, that the way that which transcends vessels comes into vessels in the inner part of the Torah, it's even higher than what is in the words of the Chacham. That which comes down the vessels through the words of the Chachamim, that's through action. You perform a mitzvah, the light comes down in a physical action. One washes their hands until Yadayim, one lights Hanukkah candles, etc. But in the actual comprehension, the mind's comprehension, even though he says it's a oir that comes in hasaga, but it means the hasaga is that it's grasped in the action itself, not in a mental type of grasp. It's not in my mind that it's grasped. But as opposed to the inner part of the Torah, the way it comes down, the way that it's understood and comprehended in the teachings of Chassidus, so it comes down, the essential broadness of the essence of the Ein Sof in a way of understanding and comprehension. Any questions?
So, why it's a combination? Each takana is either a maise or imanut memaise.
Because it's the actions of the Chachamim relate to Gedarim V'Siyagim. There's a reason why I brought down the Tils Yadayim, because that's a very basic example. The Tils Yadayim is an action that a Chamor Mesakin to do a mitzvah of the Tils Yadayim, one of the 7 mitzvahs of the Rabbanan. At the very same time, it's part of a level of Gedar V'Siyag that we shouldn't handle truma with Pamatika hands, so because of the Chamor Mesakin, that whenever we watch,
what's the siyag? What's the siyag in Chanukah?
So the siyag in Chanukah, Chassidus explains, because it has to do with the Yisra Oid Habam and Techa, that's about pushing away the darkness. It's about the idea of the darkness That's al Pesach Beis Bachutz, that over there you're pushing away the darkness of it. So it's also a gather of siyag. It's a gather of pushing away the negative.
It seems like Pesach is a good combination because we physically do the Seder. On the other hand, all these things we're not going to eat, because.
But over there you have individual mitzvahs. So there's the mitzvah of eating matzah, and then there's what we're not allowed to eat. But the way he's trying to explain over here is the wine is a mitzvah midrabanan. So since the mitzvah midrabanan, it actually encapsulates both. But this is especially so when we see the wine as being the level of Pnimius HaTorah. In Pnimius HaTorah, we have the level that in vessels, we have the level of godliness that's beyond vessels.
How do we know we got it? I mean, you have a special feeling or?
Not necessarily do we have to know. Not necessarily do we know what we got and what we don't got. That's mainly when Mashiach comes that we have knowledge and awareness of the revelation.
We don't necessarily feel good or anything. It's just.
Yeah, it could be, but it doesn't have to be. It's not necessarily so. Okay, let's continue in Ois Pei, bottom of page Yud Aleph, line 23. So now we're going to get back to the topic about Simcha and how that fits in with the concept of Bittul. How do we have the idea of Bittul and Simcha? How do they both work together? We still need to understand the connection of all the above to the idea of joy. Since joy is a level of expansion, like we spoke about earlier, in Siv Gimel, it's in such a way that the person's existence is felt. That's the idea of Simcha. Simcha means that he is aware of himself. He's usually in a state where he's full of himself, even not in a negative way. Just like when a person comprehends godliness, and in such a state where it comprehends godliness, that can be, and that is a cause of joy. How does the comprehension of godliness work? It's something that's grasped and comprehended in his mind. Also, the awakening of love that is caused by and developed through the hasaga that he has in Alakus is in such a way that it's also Metzias. The level of Ava is something that has Metzias written all over it. It's a Yesh Mishayev, like we always bring down the Lashon, that when we talk about love, there is someone who loves. It cannot be someone that doesn't occupy any space, or else there's no level of love. Simcha is not in such a way that the person becomes totally nullified. On the other hand, so there should be able to be a grasp in the godly light that's completely beyond the level of vessels whatsoever. Because why is it beyond the level of vessels? Or how do we see it? Because it's so high that's beyond vessels, the only way it can come down is if it's done in a negative way where we do not have something active to bring it down. So to be able to tap into that, there has to be the lack of active. There has to be the level of passive, which is seemingly identified with bittul, not with simcha. Tzarech initial bittul, but tachlis davka has to be a total state of bittul. Even the neshams of tzaddikim, those that serve the Eibishter with awe and love, that awe and love of Hashem is derived and as a result of a person's understanding and das in the greatness of the Ein Sof. We had this recently in Tanya, that where do they reside? Where do such tzaddikim that serve Hashem with such a powerful love and such a powerful awe that's derived from a deep meditation on the Eibishter? So where their residence is, it's in the world of Bria, which is the level of Gan Eden Elyon, because that is the level of divine understanding. That divine understanding is the world of Bria, and this type of love that comes from the understanding of the divine. It says, so the Alter Rebbe contrasts that and says, on the other hand, the world of Atzilus is not about being full of my love and awe that derives from my understanding and godliness, but it's a completely transcendent experience. It says, in the level of the world of Atzilus that's beyond intellect and comprehension, and the understanding that's beyond the comprehension of a created intellect, less machshavta delahain tvistram klal. Their thoughts that tzaddikim cannot comprehend and grasp over there whatsoever. Atzilus is the place where such great tzaddikim reside that are beyond the love and awe of Hashem, that are that comes from the understanding and the knowledge of the greatness of the age. Rather, what type of level of tzaddikim, what type of service of tzaddikim are the tzaddikim that their residence is in the world of Atzilus? They says, rather, like we learned this recently in Tanya, rather, we're talking here about tzaddikim that their service to the Eibishter is completely bottled, like a merkava to the roichav, like a vehicle is bottled completely to its driver, that it has no will of its own whatsoever. When a person is not coming there with his own perceptions of love and awe of Hashem, then he taps into the world of Atzilus. The Yisayim is even more so the Nebuah, because the Torah of the Parsha Shavuot explained in the Torah of the Parsha of the week of Parsha Mitzvah, the Inyan HaNegoyim concerning the idea of a nega. The idea of a nega means there's just like physically, when there's taras, the paleness of the skin is because of the blood, which is a life force and vitality, not reaching over there. So he says the idea spiritually of Negoyim means that a certain type of life force, a certain type of energy is not coming down. Says the cause of the level of Negoyim, it's because the moichin of the level of Chachma, the higher level of intellect, the level of Koyach Ma, the level of Bittul, leaves. And that is the cause in the spiritual realms for the physical Negoyim, for the physical Tzarat. What does it mean when Moichin the Abba leaves? There's only the level of the mother level of the brain, the level of Bina. And Bina, we said before, is the source for excitement and joy. Bina is the level of joy and the passion that comes out of it through the meditation and the drawing close to the Eibishter. So for this we need to draw down the level, and that should be coming down into I'm sorry, I skipped a line. Line 18 back again. Without, it's lacking the bittul and the settling down of the level of Chachma, that the level of Chachma is the level that has the shoiv, that causes that the oida should come down, and shalazet, to be able to bring this down, needs to be the Hamshach and the revelation in the level of the vessels and the words, or the letters of Torah Shebeksav, Torah Shebapeh, which Torah Shebeksav and Torah Shebapeh has to do Bechinas Leah v'Rachel, which is they correspond. The written Torah and the oral Torah has to do with the Torah Shebeksav and Torah Shebapeh. This is it says Shem when the Chumash describes the daughters of Lavan, it says Shem Hagdoila Leah v'Shem Haktana Rachel. So Chassidus brings down from Kabbalah, Hey Gedoila, that's Bina. Bina, that's the level of Leah. Leah corresponds to the level of Bina. Shem Haktana, the Hektana, the minor Hey, the lower Hey, the latter Hey, that's the level of Rachel, that's Malchus. And the Bina and Malchus have to do with Torah Shebeksav and Torah Shebapeh. Sad is Stalkos, moichin the Abba, but when the level of the intellect of Chachma leaves, so then Leah and Rachel are missing what they need to have the input into them. So what comes out of this is that the level and the forms of Leah and Rachel, the spiritual levels of Leah and Rachel, do not get their energy that they're supposed to get. On the goyim, and instead of them getting their vitality and their life force, what comes out instead is the afflictions, the tzaras, and so on. The ace, the pachas, the beheres, the different types and colors and shades of tzaras, kamavur sham, like it's explained over there also in the Torah. The mitzoida hu inyan moitzi shem ra, that is brought down that the word mitzoida is a combination of the meaning of the idea of bringing out a bad name. This is associated with the concept that we say that the tzaras is a punishment for the sin of lashon hara, of speaking bad about another yid chas v'shalom. So that's hinted in the word in the Mitzvah. Shehu heito b'chiras shem toiv. The idea of bringing out a bad name is the opposite of a good name. What is the idea of a good name? The level of a good name is a level of Torah, like it says that someone that's involved in Torah, it says in Pirkei Avos, he gets Keser Kuna, Keser Malchus, which Keser Shem Tov, the crown of a good name that goes on top of it. And this idea of the good name that a person has when he's not a Mitzvah, when he doesn't have the Shem Ra, when he has the Shem Tov, is both the level of Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shpapeh, both the written Torah and the oral Torah. He called Torah Kula Yishmaisa Shal Kadosh Baruch Hu. The entire Torah are the names of Hashem, meaning the names are something that we call and draw Hashem down, just like a physical name down here. When you call someone by name, you draw him to you, you cause that person to turn to you. The same thing, the names of the Eibishter, the entire Torah is called Shem Tov, but we draw down godliness down here. But if there is the leaving of the Moichin, the Abba, this level of Bittul, you only have the level of Moichin, of Ema, so then the Amshacha doesn't come down into the Isis, it doesn't come down into Leah and Rachel. You're missing the Shem Tov, so you have Mitzvah, you have the Shem Ra, you have the Negoim, you have the Tzaras. V'hainu, Shema Simcha v'Islavos, what does that mean? When you only have Bina without the Chachma, so from the joy and the passion, can come out that the clippus, the external ones, could nurse, which is the idea of tzaras. Nega tzaras is called a nega, it's called something that the clippus can take from v'chulu. So he goes on and says, again, top of the next page, how does this fit in what we explained previously? About the great advantage of joy, because its connection with the level of binam. That through Bina one reaches the essential broadness of the essence of the Ein Sof. How is that possible? How is it shaykh to reconcile the two? Here we seem to be saying that the whole idea of the Negoim is because of we have Bina without Chokhmah, which is Bina is the level of Simcha. And in the beginning of the Maimon we say that Bina is much higher, that it taps into the Merchava Atzmi, it's the essence of the Ein Sof, the one that taps in through Simcha. So essentially, is Simcha a source for negative? Is it a source for Yirik Sachetzoinim? Or is it a source for positive, and it draws down the Atzmas and it draws down that which is higher than being able to come down in Kale? Any questions?
So you have to have both